Aloha. This will be an extension of the last video. Just going a little deeper into from what it means, what the difference is between saying something, just repeating something over and over again, and actually speaking something, like speaking from your soul, and then going into more of like people say like, well, what are your solutions and so on and so forth. So like, what are you talking about doing? And like I've said in previous videos, it's not also something that you can do, but is as a doing this, it's more of what you're stop doing that which counteracts your ability to do anything. So that's where I'm seeing we are in the stage of right now of realizing that first of all exists before we can start doing anything, because largely the status quo of society, reality, humanity, this experience as a whole is based upon emptiness. It's lost in the world of people just saying things but not really speaking from the soul. So it's empty. So like I said, in reference to saying the earth is flat over and over and over again, and then not empowering yourself or challenging yourself to going into what that actually means, stepping into the next space of, okay, now I'm going to speak in reference to how this exists and why this exists. Now, saying the earth is flat might create a camaraderie. It might wake people up to seeing other conspiracies and other storylines. It might trigger people to start doing other things, but ultimately it's just a rest stop. It's not meant to be turned into a community, pretty much. It's not meant to be turned into a thing, just saying something over and over and over again, because that's when it can get manipulated and turned into whatever. So in reference to this, the same thing is like what happened in the civil rights time frame. See, the Black Panthers were speaking of the injustices of this system. They were speaking on and standing firm, standing their ground and saying, no, we are not just saying that there's something wrong. We are speaking on these injustices, and we will hold this ground until we can't hold this ground anymore, until our bodies, our entire life force is taken away. And the system knew that, which is why they attacked their leaders and attacked the system and created this whole COINTEL program in order to stifle that mentality of not only speaking for the injustices, in reference to the injustices, but actually taking it a step then to the next step of, no, we are actually going to hold this ground because we have recognized this system is completely not humane. It's inhumane. We realize that, and we're not looking for anything that you could give us, because you having the ability to do anything for anybody is already an illusion. You placing yourself on the pedestal as the leaders of the free world is already an illusion that is based upon criminal action, pirating this system, building an empire on the blood and the bones of the people. Today, it's everybody. The origins of this system originated by stealing land from the indigenous people. So it starts there. This is where I say when I reference this, it's to acknowledge the way this system has gone, because once you acknowledge it, you yourself can remove a lot of these programs that are attached to it. And it's not to produce blame or guilt on the descendants of these criminals. It's to bring an awareness to the system so that the people can acknowledge these programs and do something about it. Because if I bring it up and it automatically gets interpreted into guilt and blame, then that means you haven't actually looked at the system. You're actually just creating some emotional response to something that has ultimately nothing to do with you. None of the people that are alive today are, in a sense, responsible for the origins of colonialism. None of the people that are alive today are responsible for what Western civilization has done in reference to a physical warfare, psychological warfare, and a physical warfare. So if you were to acknowledge that and had already removed that density, you wouldn't automatically see, or you wouldn't automatically jump to the conclusion that I'm trying to put blame or guilt on people. That's totally not where I'm coming from, because I am aware that nobody that is alive today is responsible for what's going on today. But there are many people that do benefit from that system. And when you not only benefit from that system built on criminals, genocide, and massacres, and on top of that, you don't say anything or at alone acknowledge that system, and on top of that, create yourself to be a victim as if you're being blamed or guilty for this system, you are creating emotional defense mechanisms upon emotional defense mechanisms that are only designed to maintain apathy, distraction, and the power grid to remain what it is and what it's always been. This is what's happening today with Donald Trump and that whole Make America Great. This is what's happening with the whole idea of alternative news and aggressive progressives. This is what's happening with Alex Jones and talking about the globalists against the patriots. All of this is a distraction to keep you from going to the depths of this storyline outside of the emotional body, outside of being triggered on a shallow perspective. Being kept in that density weighs you down. And you're weighed down in a kiddie pool when you are locked into your emotional body. So it's a double-edged sword. You are not only weighed down, but you are locked in to a shallow interpretation of your reality, thinking you're the ocean when you're locked into a kiddie pool, a little puddle. And since you're surrounded by people that are also locked in that puddle, it makes that puddle look like the ocean, and it makes it real for you. This is not me saying this as if I didn't go through this program myself. I went through, looking at politics on the news, on the mainstream news. Then I went through trying to look the other way, and I couldn't. That didn't last too long. Then I went through trying to make it, get my degree and do that. That didn't last too long. Then I ended up protesting. When all of that was out, I said, look, why am I only focusing on myself as if I'm the only one struggling here, as if, this system is only based upon trying to make it in this system. That's the status quo. Take care of yourself, keep your head down, don't worry about anything else, and keep going on. Everything will be okay. Everything will pan out. And then you don't have to worry about anything. That's actually being amplified in the New Age agenda. It's taken to the next level as, that's not only what you have to do in the American dream reality, but that's all you have to do from your spiritual perspective. Just be love and light. Be one with everything. Don't be consumed by the reality of destructive programming. Act like it doesn't exist. Generate a bunch of prescription drugs and everything will be okay. It's no different than the mainstream flat earthers coming from the perspective of, this is all going to be wonderful when flat earth goes mainstream. No, it's not. You're missing out on the entire point. And in my eyes, that's more dangerous than the people who are in your face, who are obviously your so-called enemies. The people that are in your face that are that you can easily point them out when you talk about the Zionists, the Jesuits, the Cabal, the Illuminati. Like, that information is already well known. It's all out there. When you shrink it all down, it comes down to life and death, resources and zero resources, power, the illusion of power, and no power. The haves and the have-nots. Whatever you want to label that story, do it. That's up to you. However, whatever's comfortable for you. Good aliens, bad aliens. Does it really matter when you're looking at your child and whether or not they're going to have food and water on the table, and then realize that other people are struggling with that question every day because of the system itself? Not because of any one person or one group of people, because of the system itself. That's why I say it's so much more dangerous for people who are telling you to focus on one person or one group of people. And then once that's handled, then everything will be okay. That's a bogus, blatant lie. Whether they're consciously doing that or not, it's more dangerous than the people that are obviously in your face telling you what's up. You know, oh yeah, this is how we're gonna run this country. The Trumps, the people in the so-called power today. This is all puppet stuff. Everything out there in the conspiracy world, all that stuff is designed to make you focus on the shallow perspectives and never address the system itself. See, as long as you focused on an individual group, an idea, you'll never really get into challenging the system, because the only way you can challenge the system is by looking outside of fear, by not being consumed by your emotional body, by not being consumed by the systems that are in place to maintain density and maintain your distraction and maintain the space of stealing your focus. Flat Earth is just another piece on the board. It's not the game or the board itself. It's a piece on the board. It's a way you have been manipulated. It's a way that you have been locked into an illusion, heliocentrism. Flat Earth being activated in this reality is a way to manipulate consciousness to move here and there. It's even more obvious when you have these figureheads out there that are telling you to focus on the piece on the board that is flat Earth. It's flat and that's that. That's it. That's what that statement means. Keep it flat. It's flat and that's that. Every time you do that and say something like that, you are commercializing it and pushing it further and further and further and making a comfort zone, a comfort blanket for people, when right now is not the time to be comfortable. You can't heal or truly move forward until you actually recognize the depths of this program. Right now, an example would be flat Earth is like, oh, and flat earthers are celebrating and walking around, running and jumping and dancing all over the place because they've discovered everything. It's wonderful. That's it. But you haven't realized that you have casts on your legs and your legs are still broken. So you can't actually make any forward progress. But since you've been celebrating the top layer, the icing on the cake, you haven't gotten into the ingredients of that cake. You haven't gotten into the how and the why, and who's been baking these poisonous cakes for so long and then putting icing on top of them and selling it to people. So we're just dancing, celebrating. Two casts on two broken legs. And since people are just asleep, people pride themselves having gotten up and started to dance, but they haven't realized that they still have 2 broken legs. And you can't really go anywhere. You haven't stepped outside of the system because you've thought that the system is based upon that one piece on the board. It's not. You might have woken up. You might be able to move around in relation to the people who are completely asleep and completely locked into a dream. But your life isn't based in comparison to them. Your life is based upon the depths of where you take your reality. And the system is based upon maintaining an illusion of your reality to maintain control over the masses. So if there's even a sliver of maybe the flat earth was released and maybe by the system to maintain a particular level of consciousness, maybe the people that are promoting the flat earth mainstream propaganda of, this is keep it flat and that's that, to maintain, if there's any chance that that's being done on purpose, then maybe you should start challenging yourself to look deeper. Because like I said, you can say something forever. Oh, here we go. 2045. We've been saying the earth is flat for the last 20 years. It's wonderful. Here we are, 2075. We really have helped people see that it's flat, and that's that. How long are you going to keep telling that story? You don't have to go that far to realize that that's what's happening right now. And this is what I'm saying in reference to the difference between saying and speaking and then going into the space of doing something. And that's why I said in many of the previous videos, as far as like people ask for solutions, that doing this is the best. Doing this is what happens when it happens naturally. See, when you're just celebrating and dancing around with 2 broken legs in the flat earth party, 2 casts on your legs, you don't realize that you're not really doing anything. Right now, it might seem like you're doing something in comparison to the people who are asleep. And you might help people wake up. At the same time, you are now in a different space. You yourself are now in a different, you have a different horizon. You have a different outlook. You have a different responsibility. See, the people who are asleep have the responsibility to wake up, and they will only have that happen when they themselves hold themselves accountable and responsible for waking up. That's pretty much the definition of nobody can change anybody else. You can only change yourself. So think about it when you were coming into the flat earth information. A lot of people come into the flat earth information trying to debunk it. They say, oh, this is some stupid bullshit and I got to just cut it out and end it right now. And then they end up realizing NASA's full of shit. All of the stuff that's out there is a lie and we've been lied to forever. This is some nonsense. The not globe earth makes a lot of sense. This plane of existence makes a lot more sense. Scientifically, spiritually, psychologically, intellectually, it makes way more sense than any of the illusions, the CGI imagery that's been put out there. But you had to go through that process of holding yourself accountable. Nobody else could have done that for you. They could have triggered you to do that, but you have to actually do the work. That's your responsibility. So you went from asleep to now having the responsibility of waking up because people are, making noise around and, there's something else out there outside of the sleeping world. So now they wake up and now they look at all this information. But you have to realize this is an everlasting journey, an experience that is continually growing. So when you wake up, you're basically waking up into another bed. You're waking up into another system that could be relative to being back asleep. Because you have now become a different person. You're not the same person that you were when you were asleep. You're not the same person that you were yesterday. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, yesterday. Every interaction changes who you were. Every thought, every moment, every experience changes who you are. Every time you go to sleep and wake up, you're letting go and then choosing to come back. Letting go and choosing to come back. In any moment, you could pass on. But there's work we need to do on many layers. Like when you die, you don't just die because you're not just you. You're the spiritual body, the psychological body, the intellectual body, the higher mind, and the physical body. So you have work to do on your spiritual experience. You have work to do on the intellectual, your higher mind experience. And you have work to do with your physical experience. It's more complex than just being born and then die. No, there's work that needs to be done throughout this journey. And there's no one way, there's no one definition. It's not just as simple as it's being promoted by the system itself that says, just, grow up, graduate from high school, get your degree, have your kids, retire, and die. Like they've basically synthesized your entire human experience for you. And the heliocentric program is just a scientism version of that, of the history of the origins of that. They installed the Big Bang. So that's just another version of growing up, waking up, evolving, going from elementary school to high school, shifting from a caveman to a human, from monkeys. That's, going from an adolescent to an adult. And then having the responsibility as now, a human being, make fire, make technology. They've created a synthetic version of our reality. Everything is just shallow and dense and based upon these illusions. But you yourself have to go through the responsibility of hold yourself to responsible to releasing all of that density. Once you release that density, then your missions, your activities, the work that you are supposed to do for yourself, which is ultimately, if you do it from your soul perspective, is ultimately for everything and everybody. The work that you were supposed to do will present itself naturally. So when you say like, oh, what are your solutions? This is that whole thing when people ask that question. It's just kind of like you're asking for like an egoic perspective of what you should do. Obviously, I mean, anybody can say anything that sounds cool. We could, rally everybody up and go into the city halls and, take everything out and start over and all that other stuff. And it's just simple, and it's based upon the system's way of approaching this system. But once you start waking up, you start to see more, you become more able. You have more abilities. You have more perspectives. You have ways to approach different experiences from a higher vibration. And you won't be allowed to get to that higher vibration until you have released all of the densities, until you've jumped out of that kiddie pool, until you've dropped all the weight of those mind control programs and started swimming in the real ocean, the ocean of your soul. You can go through the ocean of humanity. You can go through the ocean of whatever you want to call it, the ocean of the Most High, the ocean. There's various layers and perspectives of this ocean, but ultimately it goes down to interpreting the information that is outside of this physical reality, the soul essence of who and what you are. So I don't like to label and go any deeper than that as of now, because that's where I am as far as kicking that door open and then seeing, okay, where am I going to go? What am I going to do with this information? I am no longer needing to filter my perspective and my relationship with my soul, with the Most High, with nature, with each and everybody in this plane of existence. I'm no longer needing to filter that information through a political perspective, a university system perspective, any kind of religious perspective, or anything that has been fabricated by this system. It is constantly growing, and I am a part of that experience. So we're trying to figure out what that is. But the design of this system is to keep you shallow. And that's really what I wanted to focus on this video with. That was just kind of like an intro into my perspective on doing this and so on and so forth. And in order to do anything, you have to go outside of that fear. And see, that's another part of this celebration and dancing around and celebrating, the flat earth. A lot of that comes from the fear of what now is being brought to the surface. The fear of having the possibility that you will lose your comfort blanket. You will probably lose your fancy house, your fancy condo, your fancy car, your fancy job, your fancy life, because all of it was generated on top of an illusion in the first place. And it really is a comfort blanket to start celebrating. Some can even take it as far as a disease, to start celebrating something in order to avoid the reality of what's really being presented here. The reality that your entire world is not what it's been conditioned within your reality. The reality that you've been lied to your entire life. There's something severely wrong with people who jump automatically from realizing that you've been lied to your entire life. Your entire reality is not what you've been told. The system that is in place right now that keeps everybody so comfortable in their illusion is all built on lies, death, destruction, blood in the bones of the ancestors that came before us. All of this doesn't really exist. To jump from that space of realization straight into a celebration of what helped you realize that stuff, to jump straight into that and not realize, not go through the grieving, it's like skipping over the grieving process. That's basically what it is. It's jumping over. Just imagine if somebody skipped the grieving process and created an entire world based upon whatever kind of illusion they created for themselves. That's what I'm seeing is happening with the commercial, hoping this goes mainstream perspective, knowing that the mainstream is the slave system, knowing that anything that comes out of that system is going to be only to protect itself at the expense of everything and everybody else, including nature, including humanity. These are proven facts over the timeline that we've experienced all of these lies and deception. The proven fact is that the system itself will protect itself at the expense of nature and humanity by any means necessary. And people who are aware of the flat earth and all of this other information know this. And if you know this, and then you start celebrating what triggered you to know this stuff, And then also to add on top of that, want the trigger mechanism, the little itty bit of truth that you have with flat earth to be accepted and expanded upon by the slave masters who lied to you in the first place. Something's very off with that. There's some psychological things going on there. And as simple as I can break it down, it's people that can't let go of the comfort blanket. It's all of that, though, that whole psychological child mind perspective. That's what it really gets down to. It's being comfortable with that Stockholm syndrome. And since flat earth is so vibrant, flat earth is so real, it touches people so deeply in their soul when they realize that they have a connection with some kind of soul creator, some kind of essence that is beyond, some kind of creative intelligence that is beyond the shallow bullshit that we are experiencing every day. You have a meaning. You have a purpose now. You might not know exactly what that is, but at least you know it's there. Whereas before, you were just a floating piece of shit, just floating through space after you were shat out of the Big Bang and just happened to appear on Earth and just happened to, build a Commodore computer, then a iPhone, and then whatever else they're putting out there for you to celebrate. Celebrating the flat earth is no different than people having to celebrate technology. It's just calibrated differently. It's just another style. In a sense that what's really happening is the distraction from the system itself. And like I said, to add on top of that distraction, people limit their so-called forward progress to the movement of the system and not really challenging themselves to going into uprooting the foundation of that system. These are some other proofs of how we are kept shallow and how this whole system can relate. Like I'm saying, like, it's easy for me to just say this over and over and over again and then speak on how deeply this program goes. But I'm going to give you some examples of how the shallow interpretation of flat earth. And like I said, there's a lot of people that get really hurt when I start talking about flat earth and flat earthers and that whole community and that whole thing from this kind of perspective, because it's now their world and they just got it. It's just brand new. It's now become them. It's now no different than any kind of religion, no different than any kind of anything else. It becomes who you are. And that's exactly my point. Once you vest your energy and your focus into something, then that thing can be stolen from you. That thing is just like investing yourself into the body. You are not the body. If you limit yourself to the body, you will limit your experience to the limitations of the body. If you challenge yourself to going into the higher mind and going into the soul, then you will expand your limitations outside of the body and start going into the potentiality with the higher mind within the soul. But this entire world is based upon not only limiting your perspectives of you, who and what you are, but limiting the future generations of that and maintaining control of all of these perspectives. So see, like, when I reference the Black Panthers, the difference between the Black Panthers and the Civil Rights Act is basically like the difference between the essence of the Black Panthers, like the origin. The people in Oakland who are just like, shit's fucked up, man. This shit's been fucked up for a long time. We need to start feeding our kids. All right, let's create the WIC program. We need to get these breakfasts to these families. All right, let's start putting school lunches out there. All right, now we're starting to get, big. Like, how are we going to take this on a massive scale? All right, we need to start engaging in politics because that's where it's all coming from. See, it organically grew on its own to that, but they started out naturally, and then the whole COINTELPRO came in and all that other shit. That's the story that you are told. You're not told about the school lunches. You're not told about the WIC program. You're not told about, their perspective of by any means necessary. And the reason why they were coming from the perspective of by any means necessary is because they were completely aware of the fact that this system is based upon making itself grow bigger at your expense, at the expense of nature, by any means necessary. And if you do not realize that, at least acknowledge that, then you will forever be locking yourself into another trap, into another illusion. And that's the difference between the essence of the Black Panthers and the essence of the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act was a doggy treat. It was a few less whips on your back than you had before the Civil Rights Act. But are you still being whipped? Are you still in the slave field? Are you still subjected to the slave house? Does the slave system still exist? Were the injustices that are in and around all of those systems ever addressed? No. They were just given another side dish in the slave meal. And everybody celebrated around that because they were not acknowledging the depths of the system itself. Which is why something like COINTELPRO was generated to go directly at groups like the Black Panthers. The way Flat Earth, the mainstream perspective of the Flat Earth community as of now, is no different than the Civil Rights Act. In fact, if you ask me, it's less than that shit because they're not even talking about the human story. They're just celebrating and throwing big ass parties that the earth is flat. But you're not really acknowledging the depths of this story. If you were, you wouldn't be coming at it from that perspective. It would hurt a lot more. But a lot of these people have never felt that hurt. They've never had to experience that. And that's the status quo of the mainstream as a whole. People are comfortable with that. They don't want to talk about the system. They don't want to recognize the Native Americans, the indigenous people across the world. They don't want to recognize the destruction of nature. They don't want to recognize the genocide and the massacres. Because if they acknowledge that, then that will add an instability. It will make unstable the comfort zone that they're in. And that's very dangerous for a lot of people. So in order to maintain an even keel, we have to, throw these parties and create a community and camaraderie and all that other stuff. And like I said in previous videos, there's nothing wrong with that. That's people's way of processing and growing and then going to the next level. Going deeper into realizing what's going on. Because realizing the flat earth, and then a lot of the reasons why the grief and the healing is not being done, because it's so shocking. It's a shock to realize that the entire infrastructure of this system has gone so far to what it has gone today. It's not only made itself out to be a king and queen and god of all of this reality, but it's created a system where you actually defend it. That's beyond making yourself out to be a king and a god. That's making yourself out to be a king and a god, and then enforcing the reality in your future generations that they are kings and gods. That's beyond mind control. That's installing mind control and then giving you the instruction manual of mind control and making you mind control your children. And then making you feel uncomfortable when you start to even speak of the possibility that this entire system is based upon mind control. This is what Trump is doing when he is saying, you need to fire these sons of bitches who are just saying, oh yeah, injustice is here, or whatever it is they're saying. Obviously, that's all a controlled opposition. It's just a movie that's being played for you. But that's a good example of what I just explained, as far as it's so far outside of realizing the infrastructure of this system that that's how far it has to go. It has to tell you from that perspective in order to maintain the dialogue. Like, that's so far from reality. Donald Trump represents a perspective that's so far from reality that you're basically watching a cartoon. See, you're watching like an action movie. And funny that's said like that, because that's exactly what Stephen Colbert did, and a lot of people are doing on their shows. They're turning him into a cartoon, because before it was just an action movie, and you were just watching an action movie thinking it was real, or a drama thinking it was real. Now it's turned into a cartoon. They're de-evolving, in a sense, de-evolving your consciousness, de-evolving your possibility of revolt by generating. It's basically making the kiddie pool that I said even more shallow, and simultaneously making you more dense. That's exactly what has to happen to maintain this system. You have to become more dense, and the pool has to become more shallow and confined, because that's your comfort now. It's to hold you down. So not wanting to look at that is a shock. Well, yeah, the not wanting to look at that is because you've been shocked. It's a shock to realize the depths of that program. It's a shock to realize to look into 9/11 and the genocides and the massacres. It's a shock to unveil the military-industrial complex, the prison-industrial complex, heliocentrism, transhumanism, CERN, the moon landing stuff, simulation theory being generated in your face. See, that's another perspective that's designed to kind of take that shock and use that energy, channel that energy of shock into something more intellectual, more believable. It's because that shock is involved, it is installed with information, and you don't really have any answers, like depth of answers, largely because you get your answers from the system itself. So that's what this system is based upon. Trump is a shock value. He's a shock every day. It just shocks you awake, shocks you back, like being like those two paddles and they're clear. He just shocks you back into the Democrats and Republicans, the colonial program, every day. And watching Trevor Noah and Stephen Colbert and John Oliver and all these other people who are making light of that system are like people who are like rubbing your head after you've been shocked. It's like, it's okay. It's gonna be okay. It's fine. Just laugh it away. Go to sleep. That's the late night show. Then you go to sleep and you wake up clear. What happened today? Oh, Trump said this. Oh, that stupid ass. What the hell is going on with this? Oh, it's okay. Late night talk show. It's okay. Ha 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 ha. Go back to sleep. Everything is okay. Oh, that was a good night's sleep. Clear. What the hell? What the fuck is going on today? Does it go throughout your day? Make sure that you are comfortable because you're spending your 9 to 5 making money, making sure everything is okay, that your children are cared for because you put in your work. It's okay. And all you want to do is relax after you get off work. So you'll turn on the television. You'll watch social media. You'll watch the late night talk show. And they'll make light of this system. They're so clever, those guys. It's so funny. Trevor Noah really broke it down about Puerto Rico. It's really, those guys, they're very smart. I'm glad those guys are out there making it real. They're only saying things. No different than saying the earth is flat, the earth is flat. Those individuals are not speaking on anything. They're just saying, it's okay, it's okay, it's gonna be okay. We're America, we're okay, it's okay. As fucked up as everything is, it's okay. Just don't go into shock during the day. Just take your shock when you wake up in the morning and just be okay with it. It's okay. It's fine. It's all right. The earth is flat, okay? It's wonderful. It's okay. I know you're in shock, but it's going to be okay. As soon as it goes mainstream, it's going to be okay. Oh, that's so comforting. It's so wonderful. I'm so happy you're here. Meanwhile, other people are telling you, hey, I'm pretty fucking positive that you're in shock right now. How dare you? I'm not in shock. I am woke. I'm not in shock. I'm one of the wokest people out there. I am awakened. I am enlightened. From the New Age perspective, I'm enlightened. You talk about flat earth, I'm woke. Talk about conscious community, I'm woke. You can say you're woke, you can say you're awakened, you can say you're enlightened all day. But speaking on that from a space of the language that's inside of you is different. So those are examples. I'll close this out with some other basic examples of the shallowness of this mind control program. That is the infrastructure of the system itself, not the pieces on the board. Alex Jones, TYT, Donald Trump, the Jesuits, the Zionists, the Illuminati, the Cabal, the New Age program, CERN, transhumanism, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye. These are all pieces on the board of your distraction, pieces on the chessboard. But until you start to realize that the board itself is what's shocking your ass, the board itself, the origins of the game itself, is the enslavement program as a whole. Until that is recognized, nothing's really going to change because you're still consuming yourself with the pieces on the board, which inherently puts you as a piece on the board. So in order to realize and expand outside of that mentality, largely, because that's what it boils down to, is a mentality. Before that, it's an emotional body mentality. An example of that is like me in the Occupy protest time frame, or me, yelling at the bakers. Like, it's an emotional thing. You're not really going to do anything from an emotional perspective. You might help people trigger and wake something, but you're not actually going to speak on anything until you start putting some weight behind that emotion. And that's when it turns into a passion. That's the inner space of who and what you are. So we're held from going there. We're locked into the shock value of this reality by the design of the system itself. And what I'm saying in reference to the flat earth, so-called flat earthers, flat earth community, all of that is just another representation of handling dealing with the shock. And I am aware that before you can actually become aware that you are in shock and do something about that shocking reality, you have to prepare yourself. You have to build up your strength. You have to get your strength back after having been in shock. And that's what people are doing right now. They're coming together. They're like, oh, celebrating. That's what I'm seeing. That's the positive side of that celebration. But what I'm saying is that if you stay in that, you're actually going to maintain and expand that shock value, that shock system. And that's more dangerous. Like, people can actually die from shock. Like, this is a medical thing. I just remembered this from like combat lifesaver shit. It's just like, you can actually die from shock. Which is another example of why it's so normal for people to, jump into celebrating. It's normal, but it's not natural. Celebrating an awareness of something like flat Earth in order to avoid the shock. It's normal to do that. It's normal to, I'm pretty sure everybody does that in some sort of way. Like, I used to watch Patricia and Mark's show and all these other videos in the beginning of Flat Earth and be like, man, this is comforting that it's there. But 2 years have passed now, and they're basically just maintaining the world of shock and not really doing anything about it. So it's kind of like, it's weird. It's kind of like all over the place. It's so complex. And that's what I'm saying. When people hear these videos, they hear them from a linear perspective. And I'm so all over the place with this stuff. And I ultimately don't have any expectations or judgments on these people. I'm just bringing my perspectives to the surface. And when they're perceived from a judgmental perspective or an expectation perspective, that's when people start to say, you're wrong. Dislike this video, and I'm gonna make a comment on how you're just a bad person because you're talking bad about flat Earth and flat earthers. Oh, shame on you. Shame on you. Okay. All right, that's fine. I understand that. That's part of this whole like online interaction that's going to happen when you're talking to so many people about such a like intense subject. So yeah, I want to close this video out, and I'm getting kind of tired right now. So those are all the examples of how we are kept shallow, how this whole shock world is affecting us, and how people deal with that, and the why the shock is there. Literally, all the privilege, all of the beautiful things that come from the Western civilization. I'm going to lose that if we start talking from that perspective. I can't do that. I'm just going to celebrate this. It's shock. It might be dressed in a fancy suit and a pretty smile, but you're still in shock. And you'll remain in shock until you actually work through the shock system. When you work through treating that shock, healing those wounds, acknowledging that system, grieving from all that has lived hard and died from this system. People are in shock. And it's not just, I was just using flat earth as an example for, same thing goes for people in the American dream. After 9/11, after Vietnam, this is what happens. This is at the essence of like PTSD for like Vietnam vets. Vietnam vets being sent overseas to go kill people when they're not even accepted as human beings in their own nation, in reference to the melanated people who are enlisted into the war to go fight a war where they were still being called nigga and nigger and coon and pickaninny and all that other shit over here. That you have the power through your criminal empire to now send my life or my son's life or my grandchildren's life, their soul, over to Vietnam, and you don't even recognize them as a human soul here right now? You think that shit has changed since then? Well, listen to that. It was just what was that, a fire chief who just got fired for calling somebody a nigger. That, I mean, this is today. This is not 1960 or 50. This was like day before yesterday. A fire chief. That's just what was leaked out of his mouth. That's not what he was actually thinking. It's deeper. It's way worse than that. So what about all that way worse information that is existing inside these old decrepit ass politicians that are in the White House right now, who only get in there because the same way you get into bigger businesses? All who you know. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And if you're in with the crew, welcome aboard. All you got to do is play this game. And then you'll remain in power by expanding the illusions. And like I said, why I come down so much on so-called mainstream flat earthers is the same way I come down so hard on people like Trevor Noah, John Oliver, and Stephen Colbert, is because they're making light of this. They're not allowing you to heal. Ultimately, they might be good up to a certain point, but when it turns into a system, a community, an entire rallying point, that's when you're starting to get into another world. And that's when you become more dangerous in the system, because you have now made people comfortable with that system. You've made the system okay. This is what flat earth going mainstream is, that whole mentality. Like, all publicity is good. But who gives a fuck about publicity when publicity itself is based upon the system? Yes, I understand it will help implode the system the more information that gets out there. I understand that part. But what I'm saying is that on top of that, are you also recognizing your responsibility to address the system? Or are you just waiting for the system to make the moves for you? Because if you're waiting for the system to make moves for you, which is what hoping flat earth goes mainstream is, then you're coming from a disempowered, enslaved perspective. And that's what I said is actually more dangerous than the people who are out there, you know, just punking you in your face, enslaving you in your face. Because you will be set up for the next shock-infested system. It's like, oh, this is wonderful. Now we have robot arms. We have transhumanism. We have another perspective of our reality. Now the mainstream is aware that it's telling people that the earth is flat. Isn't this wonderful? This is like a human renaissance now. Everything is just better. No, you've just gone from shock level 1 to shock level 2. And you'll continue to go into shock level 3 and 4 if you don't recognize that this system is maintaining shock. And slowly but surely killing you from the inside out. Because it eats away. This is what cancer is. Eats away inside of you. It's just a manifestation of holding all that energy and having to deal with that. All of this stuff that is in our reality, your food, your water, your education, it's designed to implode your natural systems. The mainstream itself. There's nothing to take pride in, even if it goes flat earth or when it goes flat earth. It's still nothing to take pride in, because that's the pinnacle of this cancerous shock maintaining system. Celebrating, making everybody feel like it's okay, it's wonderful, keep it flat, it's gonna be fine. You know, the views on Google and YouTube have jumped exponentially in the past couple years for flat earth. We're making progress. Are you? Or is it making progress? Are you making progress? Or is it making progress? When you're talking about search hits and all that other shit from Google and YouTube, which is still the system, mind you. So you're talking about the system itself and the mainstream system itself, which is all one and the same. So are you making progress, or is it making progress? And at the same time, who the fuck are you in this whole system that has gotten up to where it is today? What are you when you vest all of your energy and your focus in the movement of your slave masters? What does that make you? And what does that make you when you come down on other people who are exposing the infrastructure of this slave system and exposing people who are remaining comfortable in this slave system? What does that make you when you come down on people who are doing that? People are talking about the system itself. It's two different books, two different layers of shock. And people deal with shock differently, just like they grieve differently. Because grief and shock is pretty much one and the same thing. When you're grieving, you're in shock. When you're in some kind of way. So if people are saying, look, this entire system is destructive, no matter how wonderful flat earth is, it can easily be manipulated by this system to maintain shock and expand the program. And when you say, oh, you're divisive to that individual, what does that make you in this whole system? This layer of, it's a multi-layered cake. And if you're vesting all of your energy in the icing of that cake, then that's a proof that you are still in shock and you're trying to maintain shock for other people. There's no different than like your parents telling you, oh yeah, I went into the military, so you need to go into the military. You need to be somebody. You need to have a successful lifestyle. You have to you need to be successful in the American dream. And then you do that to your kids. And then they do that to their kids, and so on and so forth. That's a shock that travels through the generations, which is being maintained on a collective scale, which is being maintained by the people who can't let go of the origins of this Western civilization. No different than like the baby boomers of today, who are just like saying, oh, these little millennials and these younger generations, they just don't know how hard it's been for us to get what we've gotten today. We built this country. We've done so much. Completely ignorant of the blood and the bones of the system itself. Because they are in shock too. They can't realize, they can't acknowledge that system because it's too shocking. Part of them will die from acknowledging that shock. Patricia is 50 years old. Her dealing with shock is fucking hard. She's got a lot of density up there to deal with. Same goes for Mark's dopey ass and all these other people who are locked into that system. I just use them as an example because people know what I'm talking about. The older you are, the harder it is to let go of these systems because you've had more density piled on top of you, not only in your experience, but of the experience of your generations before you. So if she's 50 years old, how old was her mom? When was her mom born? And just keep going further and further back. You damn near in the 1800s. Shit, my grandfather was born in 1912. And I'm in my 30s. So just, do the math and then convert that math to psychological warfare, indoctrination, grief, healing, broken legs, and shock. And just pile it on top of pile. And then, of course, and you're dealing with, people having, to work through that. But ultimately, the bare bones is like babies. Babies don't got to deal with that. They get indoctrinated. I was thinking about this the other day. This shit made me laugh my ass off because it's a perfect example of the mind control. Mind control is not limited to humanity. Because I was thinking about that the other day when I was looking for a title for one of these videos. I can't remember what it was. But some people know this shit too. You have racist dogs that exist out there. And the people I know who heard that, they know what I'm talking about. You have racist dogs. They might be colorblind, but they are not like shade blind. And ultimately, you go further, it goes down to the energy. The dogs reflecting the energy of their owner. So when I say you have racist dogs, only people who have experienced that shit know what I'm talking about. You have these dogs that will not at all. They will be friendly as shit to so-called white people. When they see a black person or somebody who has a darker skin tone, they will bark that and will attack those individuals. And it's not only about the skin tone, it goes into the energy, like I said. But point being, where the fuck did that dog get that information? From his owner. Same thing goes for the kids. So if that's happening, this is just an example of, what's really going on here. It's not as simple as, racism is this definition and da 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 da. No. The healing needs to be done. You think because the Civil Rights Act was activated at that time frame, did that do anything for racism that exists in the mind control of the people? No. In fact, it probably made it worse. They just went underground. They just jumped into the police department. Same thing. That's what's happening today. But you can't say that. That's too shocking. How dare you? These individuals are protecting the line. And this is what happened in one of the recent Joe Rogan podcast when he was talking about the whole Colin Kaepernick thing and that whole thing, and they will never when the systems that are trying to maintain shock, they will never go into the psychological warfare of it. They will maintain another example of that is Joe Rogan talking about the police department and saying, they outside of all the horrible shit that they do that is triggered by racism and so on and so forth. These cops, they have a hell of a lot of PTSD from what they have to go through every day. I mean, they really do go through a lot of shit. And then that's totally not at all recognizing the infrastructure of the mind control that allows the system to come to its total diversion. It's a diversion tactic. That's what maintains. It's just like John Oliver, Stephen Colbert, and Trevor Noah. Comforting you and making you laugh is a diversion tactic. No different than Joe Rogan saying, well, these cops have to deal with a lot. It's keeping you shallow. These are just other examples of what keeps you shallow. And what I'm saying is that when I mentioned Joe Rogan and all these other late night talk show hosts, the reason why I come down so hard on the so-called top brass of the so-called flat earth community is because they're doing the same thing. Ultimately, they're maintaining shock when they don't go into the how and the why of this story. When Joe Rogan talks about that and he doesn't at all, knowing he's an intelligent dude, he knows the origins of this shit. The psyche of this program is not just going to go away because you created some happy meal of a civil rights act. You created some happy meal of, some celebrity saying something about racial injustice. And then just, it's no different than like I said in the last video, people donating money. That's the difference between donating money and not really saying anything about the system itself. It's shallow, and it's meant to be shallow to maintain shock. So I've been trying to close this damn video for long enough. But I definitely wanted to name these few things, and I think that I've built up that perspective enough that I can kind of breeze through, because I've given you more examples that I was even thinking I was going to go into than the ones that I had written down. So I went into flat earth and then maintaining shock. I went into the comfort of comedy, the comfort of victimization, like Joe Rogan talking about PTSD for cops and just avoiding the entire issue itself. Climate change is another one, kind of like the comfort of the world is being changing for the better because people are now talking about climate change. It's kind of like putting Bernie Sanders out there as if they weren't already going to put in Donald Trump. Putting Bernie Sanders out there to make Hillary Clinton look like less of a bag of shit. Putting Bernie Sanders out there to make you think that the system itself is not ultimately a bag of shit. So by having Leonardo DiCaprio speak about climate change, and you like him, you like his movies, it softens the blow, like Stephen Colbert and so on and so forth. And the energy itself of looking in the system, I was like, oh, things are changing. It really stops your acknowledging the system, and it stops you recognizing the shock of the system because you think it's changing. So same thing goes, like I said, where's flat earth? And I'm trying to find my spot now. Yeah, so something like climate change keeps you from looking at weather modification, HARP, geoengineering, NextRad, all of the other systems that are out there that are actually inflaming this program because it benefits the shock. So you have to be rocked to sleep. They have to comfort you. They're playing your mother and your father. Donald Trump is basically playing your stupid ass ignorant father right now and shocking you into the real world, while your motherly perspective is coming from John Oliver, Stephen Colbert, Joe Rogan, Alex Jones. They're like giving you that tough love, and they're also rocking you to sleep with comedy and loving perspectives. Same thing goes for like flat earth top brass. Oh, everything's gonna be okay. It's just gonna go mainstream, and then everything is gonna be awesome. Everything is awesome. Everything is great when flat earth goes mainstream. Everything is awesome. Wonderful. Thank you, flat earth team. Keep it flat. We did it. No healing happens there. It maxes out at shock. Avoiding shock. And like I said, why I say no healing happens there? Because the only healing actually happens once you start dealing with the shock of the human experience. It's you, the experiencer, that is in shock. This is not to say that, oh, yeah, talking about the human experience or going to the is like a prescription drug. It's not linear like that. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that acknowledging the shock of the human experience opens up the door to actually starting to come up with real solutions and come up with things that are going to shift this world out of this destructive slave system. But if you ain't doing nothing about that shock, you're just dancing around with two broken legs. Like Lisa Turtle in that Saved by the Bell, she's doing the hop. Do the hop. That's what's happening in the flat earth community. You on some crutches with a broken leg doing the hop. So that's a good segue into the when I was talking about the feminine and the masculine energy being promoted in your reality and rocking you to sleep and shocking you into reality. The same thing goes with mixing up those energies with all the transgender stuff, the LGBTQ stuff being mixed in with the racial thing. It waters everything down. So when you mix in LGBTQ stuff with the origins of racism, you're not going to allow yourself to go to the depths of racism. You're going to water it down as we're all one. Excuse me. It's all human. Everything is the same. Injustice is injustice. And all of that is to avoid the shock of going into the origins of white supremacy and the fear of white genetic annihilation and so on and so forth. The origins of why white supremacy exists in the first place. See, people don't want to talk about that. They don't want to go into the psychology of that. And a lot of people who are watching these videos for a long time but would know what I'm referencing there. For people who are new to this channel and don't know what I'm referencing there, check out the research of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, where she goes into the psychology of the origins of stuff like white supremacy and racism and so on and so forth. Not to say that that's the only thing that's out there. And what I'm saying is that it's very crucial information that's a part of this process of breaking free of this shock, healing out of this bullshit. So to avoid all of that other stuff, people fill their realities with something that feels like forward progress and avoids the shock through so-called forward progress. So you have like the whole mixing of like and this is also an example of, and this is really what I wanted to come from the perspective of, this is an example of the keeping your perspectives, like keep it shallow, keep it flat, keep it just basic, like it's just this. Stuff like people worshiping their body. You won't be able to go into the higher mind and the soul if you are constantly consumed with, you know, how your body is perceived by other people and you thinking that you're the body. So this is why you have social media with all this gym shit that's going on. It's women who are basically building their bodies up to look like men and then like be like built like men. This is the result of a patriarchal programming. It's not the result of a balanced society by any means. It's largely rooted in the strength of the feminine energy not being acknowledged for what it is, organically, naturally, alchemically, and women converting that lack of acknowledgement into the patriarchal acknowledgement system through attention that they get from building their body up to be so attractive, and then also building their so-called strength up from a patriarchal, a masculine perspective, to be respected in the patriarchal program. So at least it's a double-edged sword. It's both a coping mechanism to deal with an out-of-balance society and a way to become artificially equal within that out of balance society. So you have people building themselves up within this illusion in order to just avoid dealing with this system as a whole. And another perspective of that is like all of this worshiping of the feminine sort of relationship to nature. So like women in from the commercial perspective, from like women wearing vagina hats and women just seeing the shape of the vagina everywhere in nature and just saying, yeah, we need to love the women because vaginas are all over the earth. So vagina, 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 just everything is about, being a woman is about, having a vagina. Like the earth comes out of the vagina, the birth, the future generations come from the vagina. It's just a vagina. Instead of looking at the essence of the divine feminine quality and experience, it's shrunk down to the physical representation of the vagina. And like I said before, I know that there are stepping stones. There's a process that needs to go from the shock value. I recognize that. But just like I said with the flat earth system or the flat earth community, side effects, negative side effects come from being sucked into that egoic, shallow version of, change and reality, and things get lost there and other programs get installed in those gaps. So the gap that I'm saying is that the gap in you worshiping the shape of the vagina because it looks like an orange, if you cut an orange in half, or it looks like a guava, and like that's just another, it's just another side effect to the patriarchal programming. But what I'm saying is that, like, ultimately there's nothing wrong with that because it's a part of this healing process. What I'm saying is that we have to also simultaneously recognize why those systems have to be portrayed as such, because of the imbalance of this society, the imbalance of the infrastructure of this reality, this patriarchal programming. That's why it's so vibrant. Like the actual alchemy of the feminine energy wouldn't need to be portrayed by holding a guava over your vagina as, a sign of how wonderful the feminine energy is. You wouldn't even have to do that because it would just be common knowledge. But see, that common knowledge that largely our ancestors were already aware of is so taboo that people have to, in this patriarchal system, that people have to take it to an extreme. And even more an extreme than that is this whole pussy hat stuff, women's empowerment. And then that gets just like the gym body of the woman gets interpreted from the perspective of women screaming at the top of their lungs at a Trump rally for women's rights and stuff like that. And then largely it's converting your feminine energy into a patriarchal masculine perspective. And two things get lost there. You lose the original feminine energy and you start to develop a synthetic feminine energy. That's what I'm saying. That's another example of how dangerous it is to have these systems just continue on the way they are as if that's just business as usual. No, those are creating gaps within gaps of reality that will actually be destructive ultimately in the long run. So that's why I'm saying it's so dangerous when we don't recognize what's going on with this mainstream shallow version of flat earth and so on and so forth. Excuse me. So I think you see where I'm coming from in reference to that kind of breakdown. And that's another version of shock. Like women putting vagina hats on is a shock because is a side effect of shock in reference to the shock of being locked into a system that largely doesn't give a shit about women at all. No different than the shock of like the same thing. Okay, so this is a good segue into like the melanin thing. It's the same thing with like the feminine, like wearing a vagina on your hat. It's like melanin, it becomes your power now. It's like, no, melanin is just another part of your experience. Largely the way it's portrayed in this system from the physical experience. So people priding themselves in the melanin in their skin is no different than women priding themselves in just having a vagina. You just have a darker skin tone. You have a higher melanin content. You have a vagina, but is that who you are? Is that who the woman is? Is that what the essence of the divine feminine is? Is having melanin the definition of what that culture or that history or that connection with nature is? That what melanin is? Just having it? No, obviously. Because there's a hell of a lot of deeply melanated people that are out there just as, destructive in this whole patriarchal, out of balance system as anybody else. The most so-called non-melanin. So when you realize that reality, then you realize that it really doesn't matter. I mean, it matters in many ways. Like there's a very definite science and alchemy there that does need to be acknowledged, recognized, and researched. I'm not saying that it doesn't matter at all. What I'm saying is that when you turn it into a celebration, like flat earth, like the vagina, something gets lost because you're celebrating the thing and you're not activating the essence of what that thing represents. That's my main point. So that's no different than people celebrating the thing of flat earth and not going deep into the essence of what this system represents. Both the meaning and purpose of recognizing the balances of this system and going into the how and the why the heliocentric program was installed in the first place. So I think there was one more thing that I wanted to, well, I guess not. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's pretty much, I know this video has gone on long enough. Some people like the long videos, so cool. I appreciate that. I like doing them because I get to build on. Some people like the shorter videos. Don't watch this one. If you made it this far, then it kept your attention for something. But yeah, so that's basically what it boils down to is, celebrating the thing. When you're just saying the earth is flat and that is that, then you're basically celebrating the thing and something gets lost there. And like I said in previous videos, I know that people have to go through a stepping stones. Same thing goes with like the melanin stuff and the feminine stuff. It's like, I know in order to unlock, because eventually how long can you wear a pussy hat? No different than how long can you just keep saying, oh, the earth is flat. Here I've been here 75 years talking about how flat the earth is. It's amazing. 75 years I've been at it telling people the earth is flat. What'd you get out of it? Things are changing. Based upon what? Well, the mainstream started talking about it, so that's... Did you change? The earth is flat. That's shock. But I understand that people have to go through it. You have to be triggered in some kind of way. I understand that. Same thing goes for like the melanin. People have to find... once you wake up, you have to figure out what your body is from the basic perspective. So it's like the example I gave earlier about people who were asleep and then people who wake up and then realize that they have two broken legs and start dancing around. Well, first of all, before in between that, you have to wake up and then realize your body. In this sense, people are waking up and then realizing the beauty of melanin, the beauty of the feminine energy, and so on and so forth. You have to start acknowledging, the beauty of who and what you are in order to activate it. So a side effect to that is since the society is based upon pride, the side effect is to activate any of your processes from a perspective of linear perspectives. Perspectives of pride, linear. It's just, oh, this is it, and oh, I'm super powerful. I mean, that's known, but people constantly grow. So you're gonna grow out of the pussy hat. You're gonna grow out of, being limited to just your melanin, and you're gonna go into the depths of what melanin is, or from a soul perspective, not from the physical perspective. And then you're gonna go into the depths just like a flat Earth. You're going to go into the depths of your meaning and your purpose. You're eventually going to go into those depths in your own time, in your own way. And a lot of the last few videos that I've been putting out were to help people not get consumed by the pride parties and start to go deeper in to healing those two broken legs. Healing, and so you can actually walk through the next door. So you can wake up and start dancing around with your cast all day, but you're still gonna have two broken legs until you heal them. You can't walk through that next door until you heal those two broken legs. And that's my main point. From whatever perspective you come from, Black conscious, feminine, women's empowerment, flat earth, new age community, just other ways of dealing with an out of balance system. Prescription drugs. Wearing a pussy hat is a prescription drug for a patriarchal program. Wearing a new age pussy hat is just another way of dealing with how destructive this reality is, because everything becomes just love and light, and everything becomes peaceful and one and all that other stuff. That's just another version of out of balanced reality. Wearing a pussy hat of melanin is the same thing. You have to wear that melanated pussy hat because you've been subjected to the white supremacist program for centuries. And you have to pride yourself until you start to do something with that energy and channel it outside of pride into internal action from your soul. And that's when you start going from yelling and saying, look at my pussy hat, and actually start to speak about what that system represents, what the divine feminine represents, what the melanated culture and essence and balance with this system represents, what flat earth and a meaning and a purpose actually represents. Speaking on it, not only saying it with a hat and a fancy logo on it. That's what this system is based upon, creating fancy hats and logos. And it only logos so far. Boom! On that stupid ass note, I'm gonna close this video out. So thank you for joining me. For people who stayed to the end of this video, thank you especially, because I know this is probably one of, if not the longest video that I put out. But yeah, thank you. And thank you for the support. Thank you for liking and sharing and subscribing. I appreciate that. And until next time, from all my relations, peace, love, and harmony.